Hello, it's Wednesday, and I've been painting stuff. So, some people commented on the last video asking to see the Eliminator that I didn't finish for Games Day, for Golden Demon, and then I dropped him. Always start the video off by dropping something. It's almost like I have a script. I don't have a script. So this is the Eliminator I didn't finish for Golden Demon. I'm dead proud with how the rifle's casing turned out, and especially the silencer and the scope. I think they look really, really good. And I'm also dead proud of the eyes on the old goggles there. I think they came out really good. The thing that I was left with was I hadn't finished the cloak. I basically just repainted the entire cloak Xandri Dust. Then I was like, I either spend all day painting this cloak, because I didn't know how to paint camo to a level that would be effective at Golden Demon. Like most of the people I saw that painted camo used stencils to airbrush it on, and you could tell, and they didn't do very well. You may have noticed that I think any Eliminators won anything at Warhammer Fest this year. I could be wrong, but as far as I know, no Eliminators won any of the categories. And that's because, generally speaking, if you stencil on the camo, you usually end up being able to tell that it was a stencil. So I needed to find a way to paint camo in a way that didn't look like it was stenciled on, while also not relying too heavily on the airbrush, and painting it in a way that didn't actually completely disrupt the silhouette of the figure. Because for a painting contest, you actually want the model to be noticeable, and if I ended up making effective camouflage, I'm not saying it would disappear into the cabinets and the surroundings of in the case, but it would purposefully disrupt all of the shapes that are in the cloak, which is the thing you actually want to see and accent when you're painting a miniature for competition standard. The two goals were contradictory, so I ended up just going, nope, I'm just going to spend all my time painting the other five guys. So now I can just paint the cloak however I want, and it's basically for tabletop and playing with, and I don't have to care, which is great. So that's what he looks like without the gun on. You can see I painted the inside of the cloak a little bit. Not a lot. But with the gun on, you can't really see in there at all. Very much. So yeah, not finished, but basically just have the cloak and like this brooch here and here to paint, which I was going to do after I'd done the cloak. And this gap up here didn't fill perfectly with matte varnish, but it has filled pretty well. And so I was skeptical that I could get this entire line down here to fill effectively again in the amount of time I had left before Golden Demon. So yeah, that's my Eliminator that I didn't finish. What else have I been painting? Well, I did how to thin paints for Airbrush for my patrons. So that Hobby Essentials video is up and on my Patreon already, which means how to paint aged leather is going to go up on YouTube in the next couple of days. But I am back to painting Eyes of the Nine, and these are the next video that's going to go on my Patreon, which is how to paint the horrors from Eyes of the Nine. I will probably also include how to paint the bases, because these guys are going to be mostly airbrushing, plus a few little touch-ups afterwards, for example painting this guy's tongue and his beak, and then his eyes, and then a few of the little gold details, but that's not much on that. And these guys are basically just an airbrush and a few little highlights in order to finish them off. So it's not going to be a really long tutorial, so I'll probably include how to paint the bases in there, and I'm basically just going to go for sandstone colours, like Egyptian type looking themed, because that's what Tzeentch goes for. So they're coming up, and I've been painting Kaptin Badrukk. His head's fallen off again. It's okay, it's just blue tacked on for the show of the thing. So I started painting this guy after last year's Golden Demon, when I was like, I'm going to paint Kaptin Badrukk. And if he's the only single figure I paint for 40k this year and finish, Then I'll enter him into Golden Demon 2019, and I never finished him. In fact, he just kind of disappeared after about 3 months. But he's back now, and I'm going to try and get as much more as I've done before I lose interest again. So I've repainted the back of the cloak here. Didn't really change the blends, just added a bunch more texture and touched up the yellow stripe along the trim here, giving it a bit of more three-dimensional effect. A few more highlights. And I've gone in and I've painted everywhere that I'm going to repaint that was badly painted before, just I hadn't finished painting but had airbrush stuff on it. I've gone and painted those black for later. I ended up with some overspray from some other models when I was priming, getting onto its hands, which ruined the skin colour on there, so I had to paint those black again because they were just speckled with some black paint. But for some reason it only hit this area here on the back of his hand, so he must have just been like sat off to one side and caught a short blast of overspray from something I was doing. And I've been, so like I said, I've done the extra texture on the coat here and tarted up the blends a bit. And I've been fixing the blends on these white armour plates on his stuff here, and I need to put a little bit of battle damage on them, but not too much. And dot all of the rivets on those. And what else has arrived? Oh, it's the next warbands for Warhammer Underworlds, the Sylvaneth and the Caradron Overlords, who have come in the most earthy tones. We've got moss green and just kind of a weird beige colour, although it's kind of like a rose gold colour, so maybe that was intentional. It looks more metallic than this one for some reason. All I've done is clip them off the sprues and assemble them because they literally arrived this morning. I've not even cleaned them up or anything. But I can say for certain that these guys are going to be a nightmare to paint without breaking something on them. More so than the Nighthaunts. I think Nighthaunts look like they should be fragile, but they're actually surprisingly strong. Whereas these guys look like they're going to be fragile and are fragile. So I very nearly broke a couple of them already while just trying to push them together. This guy in particular was a nightmare. Was it this guy? Or was it the archer? No, it was definitely this guy. Because the way that his head goes on, it kind of just sits there. It doesn't stay pressed in to the front half of the torso. And then to get the back half on, which secures the head in place, you've got to press on this side and push them together. But if you press on this bit of hair here, it just pops the head out and he falls out, and then like, but now I have the front and the back stuck to each other and the head's just fallen out. That was really annoying. So yeah, I have all of the Season 2 warbands. Whether or not I finish painting them this year is who knows. I'm quite far behind on the old warbands for Warhammer Underworlds. But I have them, and I have all the cards now, and unless there's another Season 2 card-based expansion like there was with Leaders in Season 1, I'm pretty much done for Warhammer Underworlds now. When Season 3 starts, unless they release some amazing looking models, I'm not going to be buying them. I'm not going to be getting the cards. It's like, I don't play competitively, I don't play in tournaments because there are none around here that are actually active or anything. Like, I've tried to get tournaments running around here and no one was interested. Like I could have shown up and then just won because nobody else was playing. The only person I play against is my fiance, and she just likes a few of the warbands, and we just play that every now and again, but not very often. I've mostly just been into it for the painting. So if Season 3 has any good models, they'll come out separately because they always come out separately. And I'll just get the models rather than getting, paying the extra for the cards and such like. And I'm just not going to take part in Season 3 of Warhammer Underworlds from a gameplay point of view at all. But they certainly will be good for painting as splash releases if I ever want to paint something for Age of Sigmar for the channel. But don't count on it, because most of the videos I've done for the warbands haven't done well unless that warband was particularly overpowered, or that video happened to coincide with the release of a battle tome. So otherwise the warband videos do not do very well, and they don't really keep the lights on. So I'm mostly going to be switching over to just doing kind of generalized Age of Sigmar painting for things that are more appropriate for the release schedule. You know, Sylvaneth are old news now as far as Age of Sigmar are concerned. So are Caradhran Overlords. So I'm in no rush to paint those, although I do love these models. I'm very much here for the Caradhran Overlords. I think they look great. It's a shame that they're not a very competitive army in Age of Sigmar, but I think the models are really, really, really good, and I just love all this steampunk aesthetic on them. I'm not normally into steampunk, but on dwarfs it just makes perfect sense. Like, these guys are going to be a lot of fun to paint when I get round to them. So that's all my modelling type stuff updated. What else? Last week's work in progress video did approximately 22,000 views more than normal for a normal work in progress video. Normally do about 2,000 to 3,000 views over a week on a work in progress video. It's not many. Most people just here for the tutorials. But I guess because I talked about contrast paints in them, the YouTube algorithm decided that that was going to be a video it's going to show to everybody. So everybody watched it. Mostly the comments on it were really good. There were a few people that decided that I was apparently being too confrontational or judgmental about contrast paints and wanted me to know that they were angry. And those people aren't allowed to comment on this channel anymore. Because if you're not going to be civil, then I have no time for you. But I have been doing some experiments to try and figure out what is in contrast paints. And here are the results of my labour. This guy and this guy. Just me figuring it out. It's like, I'm not saying that I have created contrast paints at home. I haven't. But I have figured out what it is that they've done and try to confirm or deny some of the things that people have been saying on the internet about what contrast paints are. And I can safely say that contrast paints are paint. There is nothing magical about them. There's no special chemicals added to them. They're not some amazing, crazy new Games Workshop patented system. It's just a different ratio of pigment and medium and water to the normal GW paints. Now, if you've watched my How to Thin Paints video, you'll know that when you add matte medium, or in also Lamian medium, because we have figured out that Lamian medium is just matte medium and water, which makes it probably the most profitable item that Games Workshop sell. When you add that to Games Workshop paint, it increases the surface tension, which is what wash medium does. And what you want from a wash, which is that it increases the surface tension so it wants to go into crevices. Now, contrast paints is just the same paint, probably even the same pigments, which is why they can colour match it to other colours in their range, but with a higher ratio of medium to pigment and less water in it. So this means that the paint is much more translucent and will go into the crevices like a wash, but at the same time it will cover over white and stale flat surfaces more, because again it's got a higher pigmentation ratio than water. So that's basically what it boils down to, is they're just kind of making washes out of all of their other paints without actually adding water to them to make them flow like a wash or like an ink. So they're not just inks, they are just regular old acrylic paint, but with a lot of medium in them to make them more transparent and to make them actually flow into the recesses. Now, is this a good thing or a bad thing? That depends upon what you want from your contrast paints. Personally, I'm not going to use them unless there's a couple of colours which look like they might be real time savers for painting things like white. The Apothecary White looks interesting because it just seems to create a nice little very slight blue tinge in all of the recesses, and that's 90% of what you want to do for painting white Space Marines, for example. Like, that looks really, really useful for that. The special primer is just a satin grey primer, which is already available on the marketplace in many different formats and for cheaper than Games Workshop will sell it to you. so there's nothing special about that. But the paints, at least out of the pot, will be the correct consistency for doing what you want to do. And I can't, you can't underestimate that. That's actually important, because most Games Workshop paints, you get two pots of the same colour. Like, I've had 2 pots of Screamer Pink where one was completely thick, like barely moved around at all. Like, it would just be all gooped up in the lid whenever you opened it. And some that are very smooth and very easy to work with. Like, paints from within different batches of the same colour have different consistencies. And with the contrast paints, they can't do that, because if they do that, if they let the contrast paints get to different consistencies, and if you've looked at the pictures of the bottles, it seems like they separate quite easily. But if you let the contrast paints get to different consistencies, then the system falls apart. It's not going to work, because the whole thing is it's one thick coat out of the pot. That's their whole system. And if you can't paint straight out of the pot with it, which means if the consistency is not exactly correct every time you get a new pot, then the whole system falls apart. So they've done the research for each of their colours, each of the colours that are in the range, to make sure that the ratios of medium to pigment to water are correct, in order to make sure that they actually flow the way they're supposed to flow, and then they're consistently making sure that that's the case across their entire range, which means that it's more quality assurance time and testing each batch to make sure it's correct. It may also mean that if the paints sit on the shelves for too long in a Games Workshop store, especially if it's a hot Games Workshop store, and I've never known a Games Workshop store to have air conditioning, then they may end up having to send those back to head office, because they will have gone to a weird consistency, and a customer will buy it, open it up, and discover that the paint has either has completely separated and all the pigment has dried at the bottom and all the medium is just sitting on the top. Because that's what happens when you have a really large amount of medium to pigment, is the pigment tends to just drop to the bottom and settle. And like I said, if you look in the pictures of the paint pots from Warhammer Fest, you'll notice that there is already a separation of medium at the top of the bottle, where it's slightly darker and looks a bit kind of like a more bluey tinged line, especially on the desaturated white type paints. There's a little blue line across all the top of them, which indicates that the medium and the pigment has already separated. So you're going to need to give them a really good shake before you use them, that's for certain. So, are they a good or a bad thing? It's not up to me to decide. If you want to knock an army out quickly, and then they're going to be great for that. But they're nothing special. They're nothing that painters haven't already been able to do with their paints for decades. This is not a new technique. This is a technique that is specifically for painting models fast. In the kind of the scale of things, there's not painting your models. This is the fastest way to get your army on the tabletop, is to not paint them at all. Then there's used to be just hitting them up with an airbrush, a zenithal, and then just painting the details. That was like the next fastest method. Then there's the Games Workshop base wash and highlight method, which is more time consuming, because painting a base coat by hand and waiting for a wash to dry is just very time consuming compared to airbrushing. What they've done is they've inserted a step before airbrushing that is faster than not painting your models, but is not going to give as good of a result. And generally speaking, the more time you put into painting your models, the better they'll look. So if you're painting models fast, they're not going to look as good as if you painted them slowly. It's funny how that works, but that's also true of most things in life. But so if you just want to get a tabletop army ready, done, then go for the contrast paints. They'll be great. They won't do you wrong at all. If you're going to paint an army entirely with contrast paints, I think they're going to look a bit naff. And when I said in my previous video that even the heavy metal paint jobs with the contrast paints looked rubbish, I maintain that they did, but that's because they were challenged to paint only with the contrast paints. I feel like if you took any painter, gave them, hey, here's some contrast paints and some regular paints, here's your entire suite of tools, they'll go, oh, the contrast paints have some interesting properties, I will use them occasionally for some things. But most of the time they'll end up either just doing a base coat with those contrast paints or not using them at all, and then finishing everything else off with the regular techniques. So if you just want to get 3 colours on a model, get it on the tabletop, they're going to work great. If you just want it to do a few specific effects, for example, I think they will be amazing for painting lizard men. All those scales will make them work great. They'll just make painting lizard men much, much easier. I mean, previously it was often recommended to just paint lizard men using a white undercoat and some wash, and you could get it done. I think these will look better than that. But compared to airbrushing a miniature, or just taking your time on a miniature, they are not going to look as good as these things. It's a statement of fact right there. They are not going to look as good. They are going to look like they have been painted with contrast paints, because they have. And I think it's going to take pretty specific circumstances for them to not look that way. Does that mean they look bad, objectively? I'm not getting into that argument. I don't think that they will look good, but I think they will look a hell of a lot better than an unpainted army. And that's basically where I'm going to leave it. So, there you go. That's my video. Hope you liked it. Don't leave me too much hate in the comments. You can subscribe up there. Check out my Patreon there for, again, that How to Thin Paints for Airbrush video is up there now. And YouTube thinks you like this video, and probably also this video. So, there you go. Bye.